We would love for everyone to change their name to their first and last name or just their first name, and then their pronouns if you want, and then where you work or study, so that we know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and change mine too.
I just did mine.
How do we change them?
You picked the three dots in the right hand corner of your own image,
Amazing.
and it says rename.
I'm getting emails from people who need the link.
Do you mean to send you another email with it, Mia, or do you have it?
That's okay. I'm just gonna add him to the Google invite.
Okay, cool.
Yannicka, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Yannicka.
Hi, Quincy. Nice to meet you. I'm Yannicka, one of the shapers.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Quincy in the flesh.
Just thought about something. Next event, we should have music.
Yes. Agreed. What song do you think?
Jungle.
No.
The heat.
Every Friday before the company-wide meeting we have at work, someone plays music. They share their sound, just like waiting for everyone to join.
We should have the featured speaker pick the song.
That's true.
That is a good idea.
What would you pick, Quincy?
I would probably pick. I'm a really big Tyler the Creator fan. So I'd probably pick Yonkers. I don't know if you know that song.
Really pump people up. I love it.
Yeah. I always play either Megan Thee Stallion or the Baby for my team on Mondays to really get them pumped up. So
Oh my god.
I don't know that song.
It's great. I'm gonna play us in with it now, just to start it off right.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, then pump the Doughnut economics. Let's go.
I'm a fucking walking paradox. No, I'm not. Threesomes with a fucking triceratops. Reptar, rapping as I'm mocking death's rock stars. Wearing synthetic
Fade it
wigs
out.
made of handwars, dreadlocks.
Great. I feel like a DJ. Let's give it a few more minutes, but hey everyone who's joined, thank you so much for being here. I want to let you know that this is being recorded, so if you don't want your face on there, you can go ahead and just disable your camera. It'll pretty much just be recording the slides that are on screen anyway. But also please change your name to your first and last name, your pronouns if you'd like, and where you work and study so that we know a little bit more about you. And we'll start in a couple minutes. Hey everyone who just came in, go ahead and change your name on Zoom to your name, pronouns, and where you work and study, and we'll start in a minute. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, I am Mia Eichel. I am a Portland Global Shaper, as are many of the people on this call. The Global Shapers is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. We're a network of young people, 18 to 30, who lead climate action and social justice action in the cities that we work in. This year, we decided to do our project about donut economics, and I'm not going to do an intro to donut economics because our wonderful speaker today, Quincy Brown, will dive into that. But I did kind of want to tell you about the purpose of our project, what these shape shops are intended to be. So, our hub is trying to come up with a strategy to accelerate Portland's transition into the donut. And our strategy for doing this is to bring the change makers who are doing donut related work in Portland into the same space, which is these shape shops, as community members who are interested in getting involved in this work. And then we will have the change makers present on what they're working on, as well as the gaps and opportunities that they've identified for transitioning Portland into the donut through their work. And then we will have a discussion after where we discuss how to fill those gaps together and strategize. And this will be kind of a continuous space for people to come and join and learn about donut economics in Portland. And keep the change makers who are working on it really motivated and feeling supported, while continually funneling new interested people into the work as well. So we have a really exciting speaker for y'all today. Sorry, I have to keep moving this little box around. Okay. So each forum, as I said before, will have a featured speaker who will discuss their work. This year, we have the amazing urban and regional planner, Quincy Brown. He co-founded We All Rising Consulting, which works at the intersection of a lot of donut related things. And he will present on the donut in general and give his work as a case study for how the donut looks in practice. And then he will discuss the gaps and opportunities that he's identified through this work, followed by a Q&A where you can ask questions about Quincy's work and about his presentation. And then we'll have discussion questions about incorporating equity into regenerative development in Portland. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Quincy. Quincy, are you a co-host? Can you share?
I don't think so. No, I'm still just a normal participant.
I think Noreen's got it. Oh, one more thing. Noreen, I'm sure you all can see her. If you have any technical issues or want to ask any questions, please chat her privately and don't put any questions for Quincy into the chat while he's presenting, and she'll field the questions afterwards.
Awesome. Can everyone see my screen and hear me? Yep, cool. Awesome. All right, so thank you, Mia, for the introduction. And like you said, my name is Quincy, and I'm the co-founder and principal planner at We All Rise. And I'm going to be presenting on donut economics, which is something I studied a lot in college and care a lot about, and kind of looking at the application and use cases on donut economic models, and like how to push and re-socialize people towards economic circulation and regeneration. So feel free, to ask questions in the chat, and I will try to move through this conversation so we can have a time for Q&A. So what is the donut? I kind of like to start with the idea and the conversation around the transitional economy. As Mia said that, we are in a transition here in Portland of thinking about ways to be more culturally and economically and socially regenerative. And so it's important to kind of think about like the fact that we're not there yet, and it's going to take us time and energy to get there. And so what I kind of look at is kind of the social base and the environmental ceiling of the donut, and We All Rise kind of sits as the engine that is driving kind of Portland and other spaces to get to that model. And so here at We All Rise, we work on a number of projects to support the collaborative effort that must be achieved for economic integration. So greed, self-interest, and extraction, both culturally and economically, are rooted to are the root to the broken and oppressed systems that we live in. And so We All Rise really tries to develop that social base to have it be very robust to address the kind of impending economic crises that we're dealing with right now as a city and then as a country. And so the components, like I said, there's a social base and the environmental ceiling. And so in that social base are kind of I see these as the urban planning, topics that, a lot of urban planners care passionately about and, we want to improve on. So, we have food, water, health, education, work, peace, voice, social equity, gender equality, networks, and energy. I see these kind of like as the nexus of departments or interests in an area that allow for the human system to move throughout the space. And then, there are these other systems that work kind of against that human system being able to move throughout space. And people that kind of focus on the donut economic model, they call this the environmental ceiling. So this is kind of the cap in which, we're able to continue to maintain the social system without getting expanded out to the point where we can't do a lot of things. And so what we see is a social system often creates these environmental externalities. So climate change, ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, freshwater withdrawal, land conversation, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and ozone layer depletion. And so what happens a lot is, for example, as we start trying to develop more housing and more educational spaces and more spaces for work, we often are creating negative externalities into the environment, which make it harder for us to be able to continue developing these things. And that kind of illustrates and kind of gets the question of what isn't the donut. And so I like to start looking at kind of the ever rising line and the growth and hate. So, early in American history, we took a very neoclassical economic approach, which has the assumption that resources are abundant and don't actually ever end. And so we are able to grow and extract without any repercussions. And that center, worked when we were a small growing country. But as we've now kind of grown to the capacity that we have, we're not able to look at the ever growing amount of resources that are in the American, system at the same way. We have to actually be looking at those resources as finite. And then I also like to think about the growing ever rising line of hate. I think people forget about the impacts on social that hate have when it comes to like not being in a sustainable economic model. And the way that neoclassical economics was really set up in the minds of extracting labor and resources. And that extraction of labor was really focused on particularly marginalized communities of color. And so when we think about the ever rising line, we really need to, extraction is kind of the driver of growth and hate to how we get to equitable and sustainable economic models like neoclassical economics. And industry and war kind of add into that too, and we're gonna get into what that means after. So then we kind of have this section of mass consumption in the Great Society. So after World War II, there was a lot of need to continue the growth in the steel industry and a lot of the like heavy like material based industries after fighting a war. And so there was this mass consumption development in the 50s and 60s of getting Americans to buy cars, to buy washing machines, and to buy a lot of these really high impact consumer products to illustrate how great of a society we are. And a lot of these public planning and policies allowed for vast urban sprawl and mismanagement of economic systems, which is how you got the vast suburbanization of America, which you see now, which is kind of a representation of how we thought we could just continuously expand without any repercussions. But now we're seeing through traffic, deaths, and just other externalities within urban space, that a lot of that like expansion and that mass consumption actually has a lot of problems when it comes to the environment and it comes to like human health. And so what are some of the ways in which we are transitioning, or we have transitioned away from this more extractionary ways of looking at economic development and community development and into more sustainable ways? So it's not the first time we've tried to do this kind of ecosystem modeling that also is modeled in a public space. The Doughnut growth development practice has actually been used a lot. The figure on the left shows the way in which the Chicago school used to think about urban planning and kind of understanding that there's a loop, a commercial zone, a workforce housing zone, a residential zone, and then a commuter zone. And you can kind of see how that factors into Portland, where you have this urban growth boundary that refers to the commuter zone. The end of it is the commuter zone. The loop is the central east side and the kind of downtown area. So what a lot of people call kind of the central city. And the central city used to be where a lot of the industry was located because it was near the river. And then you had a lot of the workforce housing or marginalized housing next to the river. So on the right side, you can see this kind of in the redlining map, where you have the central city. Then you have the workforce housing that was redlined for particularly Black Americans. And then as you get out in kind of the further zones, it gets nicer and nicer. So that kind of illustrates, ways in which people were attempting to create this Doughnut economic model and trying to keep things in a closed system and socialize throughout a space. But because it was rooted in this hate, there was an inability to actually create the legitimate Doughnut economic model that we're trying to get to today. So it's really important to realize that, the environmental aspect of the Doughnut economic model isn't possible without the social aspect. And it isn't really until today, I'd say, that we're really trying to figure out the social aspect. And really, I think that's kind of to say why, a lot of the protesting has been happening in Portland and around the different cities in the United States. So on that same note, kind of as we think about the trajectory of the Doughnut economic model and like the environmental justice movement and the civil rights movement almost being as catalysts to get us to start thinking about these topics collectively and together. And so I kind of see this as a pivotal moment of civil rights and EJ, environmental justice, in cooperation, where we started thinking about, the intersection of social and environment as two things. And we started looking at the intersection of a lot of different departments and ways of study. Sociology and psychology were starting to be developed, and we started thinking about human behavior and how that is impacted by the environment. And I think that really led us to kind of thinking about these more cooperative approaches. And the civil rights movement was a time of uplifting communities of color, particularly. And a lot of marginalized communities actually practice a lot of circular economies and Doughnut economic models within their kind of cultural homelands. And so I think this was a really great time for a lot of particularly white Americans to see that there are systems that work really sustainably and really regeneratively in other non-Western countries, and that there's people kind of in the United States that already understand those topics. And so a lot of the civil rights movement was also a movement towards cooperative development. lot of people don't talk about that. So Ella Baker, for example, was one of the leading theorists at the time on trying to lead towards more cooperative housing and education and living models, so that people could actually experience the benefits of the services that were being provided without the externalities of displacement or rising housing prices that were also issues in the 60s and 70s. And so, now we're really kind of moving towards this concept of regenerative management. And I think that would be, really shown kind of in the 90s and the 2000s, where, we passed the Clean Water Act, where we passed ADA compliancy laws. So we're now really trying to think about these things beyond just what we have to do, but how do we actually redress and regenerate a lot of the externalities that people have experienced, over generations. And so I kind of like to think about this as social energy and environmental energy. There's energy that needs to be put into the system, and there's energy that is kind of being taken out of the system, or maybe doesn't necessarily have a positive aspect to the system. And it takes a lot of social energy to go through a space that isn't designed to be regenerative and adaptive. And the more social energy that you go through, say, having to spend an hour in traffic, really starts getting down to the environmental degradation that's happening as well. And there's a positive feedback loop when these two spaces are out of whack or not in collaboration. But when you're able to have a regenerative and an adaptive environment, it is a lot easier from a social and emotional health standpoint to exist in the space. I think COVID has shown this in a really great example. Before COVID, we were very, I would say, out of whack when it came to our planning and development and the types of programs we were actually making for community members. And with COVID, we saw all of these glaring holes in society from a social and emotional health standpoint. And we started really thinking about, how do we plan our streets? How do we plan our societies and our spaces to be more regenerative? And I really think that was driven out of the cooperation and the dire need to work together during an emergency management planning situation and a global pandemic. But realizing that we needed to have that circular approach to transportation, to economic development, is leading us to these tactical urbanism projects and these regenerative models in urban planning that I think are going to have a really high impact on bettering social and emotional human health, but also social and emotional environmental health too. Animals and species all work together to maximize the growth of our own ecosystem, but that growth is not something that is foreign, it's natural. And I think what we're going to see as we start adapting and regenerating our ecosystems, both built and both organic, we're going to start seeing not only a higher human health, but a higher health of the ecosystem, which goes into just that positive feedback loop that isn't necessarily negative. But really what it all centers down into is cooperation and working together. And I think that's, really comes down to why we call our organization We All Rise. We always want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, but, realizing that we're all in this together and trying to understand how do we actually move towards a regenerative management model. There are some problems with this. I think the main problems, I've listed them here, are creating an equitable social base. So if we think about access to clean water, access to organic food, and access to good services, it can be really hard to actually create because of all these negative, histories and policies that we've been in. It's hard to create an equitable social base. So, the question we're gonna have to ask ourselves in Portland is how do we continue to uplift those marginalized and not a part of public policies and processes, and make sure that they're existing and being inviting into the new regenerative and adaptive environment that we're creating, and they're having a part of the actual decision-making process and the development of it as well. And then ensuring equitable distribution of transitional barriers. So as we transition, there's going to be all these barriers to access. As we know, just the way that economics works in our current system, those that have the most opportunity are going to have the most benefit. And so when we transition, there's going to be these barriers. There's also going to be these externalities as we transition. And unfortunately, just based off of history, those are probably going to fall on to those who have traditionally not been, uplifted into the process. So we have to really ask ourselves, how do we make sure that those folks are in the forefront of design, in the forefront of decision-making processes, so that we're all creating the frameworks, but really ensuring that they work for everyone. And then, in that same grain, how do we bring people into the donut? How do we accept people when we're trying to create a closed economic system? For the donut to actually work, we need to be making sure that we're monitoring our social base and adapting to our environmental ceiling. And that's really hard to do when you're not in a closed system. So we have to look at how do we, include and respect the different opinions, different ideas, and different people that are coming to the region, but it's still in a way that's going to maximize ecosystem health and make sure that we have a regenerative public health strategy as well. And so just to kind of wrap it up and make sure we have some great time for questions, I just wanted to go an overview kind of how We All Rise looks at the donut and why we bring on the projects and work with what we work with to adjust the economic system that we're in right now in Portland to strive to a more circular and donut approach. And so we see this in the work that we do kind of in 4 buckets. We have the reimagining public safety and security. We have our multicultural commercial reentry strategy. We have our active transportation and equity, and we have our education, access, and engagement. And so, as a planning firm that focuses on a lot of different projects, it can be often hard to get people to understand why we need to focus on so many different things. But in that same kind of grain of creating that equitable social base, it's really important to make sure that you have your hand in water, food, health, education, income, energy, networks, all of those things, so that you can ensure that social foundation or social base is good. And then also, address those negative externalities that are being brought onto by the economic ceiling, and so, or by the ecological ceiling. And so what we really try to do is try to bring diverse actors together, those who maybe don't necessarily work together or maybe haven't worked together in the, but should be working together. And I think like the most kind of representational of that is our multicultural reentry program. That started as Maris, my co-founder, and I wanting to help Alberta and making sure that displacement didn't continue on that street. And we decided to pop on to some workshops and some collaborative conversations around the healthy business permitting strategy in Portland that allows for businesses to open up into the streets. We just noticed a lot of inequality happening, particularly with like businesses that could access those resources to build those structures and open up on the streets. And what we were able to do in a year was not only, found We All Rise, but really develop this multicultural commercial reentry strategy for the city to get people to think about not only just having these spaces be spaces for, eating, but also spaces for exploring the city, spaces for cultural expression and relationship building, places for education. And so really just thinking about the different ways we can program street space and have a very communal and community-based approach to doing that. And I think the last one I want to uplift before I field some questions is really thinking about education, access, and engagement. And this is kind of this opportunity, what we're doing right now is kind of an example of what we try to do is like really going out into the community and engaging and understanding what people are working on and how can we bring them to the table that we're creating ourselves, but kind of in co-collaboration with a lot of these other organizations. But how can we make sure that those who are not being listened to are better listened to? And how can we create that circular economy and that's, that donut economic of scale when it comes to employment? A lot of the people that we work with are in college and are wanting to become, consultants in urban planning or economics professionals or, marketing professionals. And so we really make sure that we really have a focus on working with particularly young folks who are rising in their career so that we can make sure that there are other people out there who understand this work, who have experience in this work and can continue teaching the next generation of folks to continue the work. So yeah, I think that's kind of a good, representation of the work that we do, and the donut economic model. If there's any questions, we'll minimize the screen and stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Quincy.
Thank you. I hope that wasn't too boring.
I learned so much.
Okay,
I learned
awesome.
a lot about donut economics. But just in terms of like what's going on in Portland, I wanted to ask you a question. I feel like there's a lot more support that makes the work that you do actually, you have these incredible ideas, but you also have a lot of support that helps fund it. And I would love to hear what other organizations you've worked with to help make projects like the cultural reentry program and these circular economy spaces actually happen.
Yeah, totally. We worked with a lot of organizations. I'd say Alberta Main Street, which is the Main Street Association that runs the Alberta Arts District, has been our biggest supporters and kind of why we started our firm. And then what we were able to do with Alberta Main Street is really look at deeply why Alberta has this really great environmental arts district component to it, but it's missing a lot of the cultural creation that it had, 20 years ago. And what we found was a lot of it had to do with the actual board that was managing the Alberta Main Street and the relationships they were building within the community. And so that made us kind of go out to the community and start building our own relationships. So we started partnering with Anderson Construction, Sabin CDC, businesses in the area like Salt and Straw, and just a lot of organizations, City of Portland, Port of Portland, and just like really just building like a network in a community around this. Always talked about, always, everyone feels bad about it, but hasn't really done anything about it when it comes to displacement on Alberta. And we were frankly fed up about that and saw this as a great opportunity to actually address these things. So really, I think like just realizing that city government knows that they've done things badly, and they're looking for consultants that understand how to not do things badly. And sometimes having to work a little bit for free, or, bite your tongue in situations for a couple of months to end up in the other side of things where you're actually like the agenda setter, and deciding where plazas are going to be and like working with community members to choose that. So, I think like we're really about bringing the stakeholders together that should be doing the work, that are not doing the work. And so a lot of our projects are really just like, all right, like Travel Portland, Port of Portland, like, okay, people are coming to Alberta District, like who else needs to be involved in this? Okay, Venture Portland plays a part of this role. Like, okay, now we have the Salt and Straws and the main businesses. Okay, now we need to bring in the like community development corporations and bring in the residents. And so it's just kind of when you're truly trying to do a product for the community, it happens naturally. The partners fall into place because they want to, they know that they need to be there. And you can really build a coalition of like-minded actors who just want something better. So
we have some questions that folks submitted before the presentation, and Noreen can go ahead and read those. But first, I want to open it up and see if anyone has questions based on Quincy's presentation or about his work or about donut economics in general.
I have a question if anyone else. First of all, great presentation. I really appreciate the historical context. I don't think donut economics wouldn't have made sense without the kind of like deviation in context. I really appreciate that. I was wondering if you could give some examples of things that cities can do, like for example, the city of Portland, or in ways that the federal level or state level can do, and how those either mismatch or how they can work together. I'd love like it to be scaled.
Totally. I think public-private partnerships are really key. And I think most people are going to say this and suggest this to you when we're thinking about the transitional economy, because like we know that the private option is not the solution, and we know that the public option isn't going to do everything that we need right now. And so I think like the biggest thing I always suggest to cities when I'm working with them is like, who are the organizations that are already doing the work? And who are the community members that are already doing the work? And how can we just give them money to do that work? And if that's not a solution that's going to work, then how can we maximize our relationships with them, so that like they can go in and fix a relationship that we can't fix? If I'm saying I'm the city, I'll give an example. PBOT is a shit show. To be frank, like they're one of the worst bureaus I've ever worked with in my entire life. If I wasn't a transportation planner, I would never work with them. But, like they are running this beautiful free permit system that is giving free public space to whoever permits it. So you have to work with them. And so then you have to then start realizing, okay, what is my role in this? The community wants free public space. PBOT is giving their free public space. The community pays for that public space by our taxes. So where do I sit? I could sit more on the community side and protest, not saying protesting is bad, but I'm saying I could protest and be really frustrated with PBOT and what they're doing. And that works, it's hard, it's annoying, it takes time, and you're out there like, doing the work in the daytime and then doing the work in the nighttime. There's the other option of, going and working for PBOT, that is definitely the other option. But then you're having to deal with all the bureaucratic processes. People don't like you. They see you as a bureaucrat, and now you're working for PBOT, so the community sees you as a sellout. So you don't want to do that. So I think consulting, one of my interns actually said this, and consulting gives you the agency to be a change maker, because you actually can work for the community in practice, but you can bring funding in from the client that is maybe not doing the good relationship and start bridging those gaps. So that's what I would say I would suggest cities do, is like really focus on the relationship building potential that COVID has presented, and that collaboration that we've been doing for the past year to figure out how we're all going to get through this, and run off that, and really focus on building good collaborative work structures with like-minded professionals, and then getting those people to spearhead the relationship building to actually get to problem solving. And I think cities are trying to do that. So.
Any other questions? You can just unmute yourself if you'd like. Okay, Noreen, would you like to ask a question that came in at the beginning?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the main questions that kind of came up was just like, how is this being implemented in PDX and Portland? And I think you went over that. And I think a lot of people just want to know how to get involved in what's already being done. And I think you brought up a pretty good point with like, especially like PBOT. It's like, do you want to work for the organization, but then deal with that? And so then trying to find different ways to get involved. And then I know that even like segues into people asking like, what can like PDX Shapers is doing, or what can we do with amplifying it? And so I think that's kind of like a two-parter, but I feel like they somewhat connect.
Yeah, so kind of to answer your question about how to get involved, I mean, I think being on these calls is a really great start. I imagine that all of y'all probably work in a field or a space or studying in a space that is related to the conversation that we're having right now. So I think that's the first step, is like getting, again, a really good social base for yourself to be able to move forward in your career, to be able to do this work. In terms of getting involved, like right now, we were going to need a lot of volunteers when it comes to our events in the summer. So please help. That would be very helpful. But another side of things too, and I've been telling folks, is getting involved in committees and boards. There are not enough young people on boards like the Venture Portland or Alberta Main Street, and they're actually deciding a lot of things that us as young people are actually experiencing that most older people are not experiencing, like bars and restaurants experiencing, and like vendors and like street fair design and that kind of stuff. We're like, that's stuff that we're going out and doing. And it's really being designed by people that are probably 45 years our senior. And like, that really frustrates me personally. And I feel like it should frustrate all y'all on the call too. So like really just going out and getting on those committees and getting on those boards and like being another young person, like, moving shit and being like, yes, like I am here, I am smart, I know what I'm talking about. And just because I'm, under 25 doesn't mean that I don't know what we need to move towards. I think like we need to start having that kind of like thankless activism in Portland as young people, especially young people in professional spaces like ourselves. Because I think there's a misconstrued conception of what it means to be young here. And we're really talented, smart people, and it's really hard to make a living in Portland as a young person. So if you're here and you're doing it, it means you have something special. So definitely should get on those committees and boards, and you make a lot of decisions. So.
And how can we volunteer? You were saying about the summer, and also how can people learn more about that?
Yeah, so I will definitely be sending out an email, and we will have updates on our LinkedIn profile, and maybe we'll be getting social media. We're not sure about that yet, but I will post my email in the chat, and we are going to be having a weekly newsletter that's going to be being sent out in the summer about volunteer opportunities to get involved. And yeah, I mean, we're having a lot of events on these kind of subjects of circular economies of scale, and like working with vendors that are into the sustainability space, and just really trying to re-socialize Portlanders to care about these topics again. So yeah, definitely that. And then in kind of getting involved in committees and boards, the city of Portland has hundreds of committees that you can actually get paid stipends to be on. And yes, I get paid stipends to be on these committees, and I'm actually like making decisions for, what 10, 20 years of planning is going to look like. And so if you type in, like, for example, Oregon Metro committees, you'll find all their different committees, and they have like their Parks Equity Committee. I'm on their Racial Equity Committee. Like, they have all these different committees related onto these specific things. And all government agencies have these. And then boards, kind of the same thing. A lot of boards are recruiting right now because of turnover. And a lot of boards are actually looking specifically for young people right now. So if there's an organization that you care about, that you like, that you're passionate about, honestly, reach out to the executive director, cold email, and just be like, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is what I do. I would love to eventually join your board, or maybe join your board. Have you thought about having a youth advisory position? Would you be interested in exploring that topic? And just really putting yourself out there. And then the last thing is the neighborhood associations. Go to those meetings, infiltrate those spaces. They have funding and they have power, and they're not being used correctly. And if we use them correctly, we can do a lot of cool things here. So that's my 2 cents on political committees.
Also, I'll just chime in here. Just by being here at this Shape Shop, we're going to keep you updated on everything that our speakers talk about through email when we send you out information about the next Shape Shop and all of that. So we'll be sure that you're getting that information too. Should we move on to the discussion questions, or the discussion question, I guess? Or does anyone else have a question for Quincy?
I had a question. Wanted to jump in. This is Karen here. I work with B Lab. We certify B Corp companies, and also work with B Local PDX, or local nonprofit representing B Corps. I was just wondering if you had any advice. I mean, I work with about 200 businesses that are local and care a lot about issues like these. And I'm just wondering if you have anything that I can take to them as some tips or ways to get involved or support work like this in Portland.
They should donate to my multicultural reentry program on GoFundMe. But on another side, what we're trying to work on is actually developing a commercial equity fund, which would allow for B Corps and developers and organizations that care, that want to donate in time and money, to have a space and a platform to do that. And so currently what happens is that, like, B Corps and like developers, like, they give money to pots of money in different spaces in city government, and like it goes through like the ethers, and it doesn't really, like, you don't know where it goes to. But what we're really trying to do is like have this circular approach to like economic development, where it's like, if you actually like can give philanthropic donations, you can see how those philanthropic donations are actually being like shown in space. And so like what we're working on with the mayor's office actually right now is like, how do we create this district model which allows for funding to go into districts accounting for the equity issues as well. But so that, like, for example, if a developer doesn't want to invest in downtown because no one goes in downtown anymore, but if they invested in downtown, paid into this fund, and then this fund supported the development of like 4 businesses in that space, then there's more than an incentive to invest in these spaces that are maybe not as lucrative, but instead of displacing businesses, you're actually providing the funding to support them as they have to, address the new development that's coming into place. So that's what we're working on right now. And I think like that is going to be, a make or break kind of solution when it comes to like financing and structures of achieving this. I hope that answered your question. And I think like the last thing I'll say too is just like when you're working with B Corps, and I think, we're in the process of becoming a B Corp too, it's like really just like choosing something to care about and care about that and caring about it, not for marketing, but caring about it because you actually care about it. And like showing up to all the work days for volunteers with your staff, like, posting about it on your own social medias and also the staff social medias, like, really making yourself like an advocate for that, almost like a, what's the word for it? A mascot for that cause. I think like B Corps have that opportunity to really be mascots for causes and lead those ad campaigns and raise money for things that they care about. So.
One thing I'll add to that is there's a whole segment of donut economics that has to do with transforming businesses into socially and environmentally responsible businesses. And it has all kinds of criteria. And I think B Corp is often seen as like this gold standard for those kind of businesses. But there's not really a tie to, okay, but what is the value of having a bunch of these businesses in a city? How does it tie to the social well-being of the city? How does it tie to the overall environmental well-being of the city? And I think donut economics can really help like put those businesses into context. And I'm sure these are conversations that are probably had in B Corp spaces, but if B Corps that you're familiar with would be interested in kind of thinking about like how their business, putting their business, I guess, into context of like these more broader donut economics concepts, then I would love it if you would invite them to our future shape shops, because we'll have speakers who have incorporated donut economics principles into their businesses who are also B Corps, but have found a lot of value in applying on top of the B Corp standards, donut economic standards that kind of like take it to the next level. So if you know businesses that would be interested, you can just send them the invite for the next shape shop that we have.
Yeah, and it makes it really fun if they're located in a specific district, because then they can actually have this eco district certification that happens where it's like you're taking it from, small business all the way up into district management, where it's like you're actually making sure that the traffic and the public safety and the commercial development is also attuned to the donut economic model. And essentially East Side Industrial Council is actually one of, I'd say probably the leading business districts in the country that is actually really trying to take on the donut economic model and really try to implant it into not only like CB development projects, but also like food security projects this summer around marketplaces. So.
Great, thank you. I know a bunch of B Corps in the Central East Side Industrial District. I used to work for one, so be happy to connect.
That would be fantastic. That kind of leads us well into, I know we're running low on time, but our discussion question is kind of just to talk about something that Quincy mentioned, which is that donut economics has a lot to do with where we're putting our energy. And I know there's a lot of energy in this room and a lot of people working on really cool things that contribute to the transition into the donut. So I'd love for anyone who is doing donut related work and can kind of speak to the connection either between what their work in donut economics or their work in Quincy's work, and you want to talk about that, we welcome that, and we would love to hear from you.
Sure. Hey, hi. I'm Jenny. I am the founder of HazAdapt. We're a small startup in Corvallis, Oregon. And we are at the nexus, between the public and communities, as well as our public safety and emergency management. So we're creating humanity-friendly technology and interfaces and apps that help our communities engage and empower them, and create more balance in that sphere. And we're using a very similar social solidarity economy. And we're trying to build just like this donut economics down here in Corvallis. So this is still a start, and we're just starting to get partners on board. And I'm looking to also see, other startups or other businesses that are running this, and what are the different key metrics of success metrics that they're incorporating into their models.
Thank you so much for being here. Well, I'm so glad that you came, and we're going to have our next Shape Shop is going to be focused all about applying donut economics to businesses. So we're going to talk more about those tangible metrics. There's like pillars for donut economics for businesses, and that will be a good first step. And then we can go even more in depth. But your startup sounds so amazing. And that actually touches on something that we've discussed a little bit in our group, is how can we look at Portland within the context of Oregon, and maybe get involved with more cities around and see, are there differences? Are there like benefits and difficulties with being in certain cities in Oregon, and trying to maybe bridge the urban rural divide while we're at it, as Quincy once said. I think there are really interesting things to be explored when it comes to what might be easy or difficult to implement in Portland might be easier or more difficult to implement somewhere else. So yeah, definitely come to our next Shape Shop where we'll be talking about the business aspects.
Definitely. One thing that you just said right there that I want to echo, the bureaucracy between, a really small entity versus a large entity can be honestly a lot of what hinders or what promotes, having a social solidarity economy, because, and just like Quincy was saying, it's so hard to or it's not hard, but it's just, there are people out there doing the work, but looping them all together really does require that almost interdimensional space between, the public, private, and government. Yeah. So, in this area for public safety and community, information sharing, we fit really well, in that moment.
Great.
I was gonna say something to kind of think about. On that same model, there's so much different in Oregon. It's such an interesting space, because Portland issues are Portland issues, but Portland issues are not Eugene or Corvallis issues. And so it's really hard to actually take these concepts that we're doing in Portland and apply them to other cities in Oregon. And we're trying to do that in Eugene right now with some of our work. But I think, you can even make the argument that cities like Corvallis and Eugene are actually closer to the donut economic model than Portland is, because of how community centered it is and how relationship oriented it is. So, my suggestion would be, Jenny, to you is really, if your firm is starting to becoming that kind of collaborator and kind of, point person to get people to work together, see that as your role, and really get people to start working together in Corvallis, because you will probably get, some of that stuff done really quickly. And maybe Corvallis becomes a model for Portland.
And that's also the university aspect and how much of the city is surrounding the university. That's also a really key play in there that's hard to replicate in other areas that don't have that model. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, but I also want to find people like yourself that are also experts in this. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here as my first one.
I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but thank you.
Presented like one. You were fab. No, you're great.
Awesome. Any other questions? People doing donut related work? I also wanted to add, students who are here, have you learned about something similar to donut economics in school? I'd love to hear about your experience in college and what made you interested in this topic.
I'd like to say back when I was at Portland State, right after graduation, I studied abroad in Japan, and it was a field study to go learn about earthquake preparedness and emergency preparedness over there for the region that got affected in 2011, and how those theories can be applied back to Portland if and when the big one happens. And my thesis ended up being about how like intersectorial, like how like Jeannie was mentioning, like how you need to like work with like public and private and work collaboratively together for these kind of situations. And so that was just something that was eye-opening, that I wasn't just on the government or on like local people or like businesses. So they had like different organizations coming together to create that kind of like plans. And so like we had like Mitsubishi Estate, and then we also had like local community leaders, like one guy who was just like affected, like his whole family, and then he decided like I need to advocate for this, so he joined local government, and that was what he did. And he ended up changing like a lot of the ways for like creating levees and like better barriers for his town. And so I think that was just something that was really eye-opening, that I always presumed that it would be like, oh, like a government entity just needs to figure this out. But I was like, no, like this needs to be on citizens. We need to get our voice in there. We need to have local government involved, as well as like business that usually has the money and the influence too, at least. And plus they're affected as well when an earthquake happens. So I think that was really eye-opening to see. And I think that's falls into this, like how being supportive of the community.
That's great.
That
I
was-
completely agree.
Oh,
Sorry,
I
go ahead, Quincy.
was gonna say I liked that because it's like I think we forget that policies made by active citizens. And so if there's not active citizens that are willing to go out and try to make policy, then we don't get change. So totally.
I just want to thank you for the term social energy. I think it has like, I think about social energy a lot and never had the word for it. And I think it has like really helped me connect a lot of ideas that are already like connecting in my mind. I think a lot about like the interconnectedness of our communities and the importance of like reflecting our environment and our like the interconnectedness of our nature, and that social energy is like a huge aspect of that, and like how our systems naturally deplete or uplift different types of social energy. Yeah, I don't know, that word just like really helped me like bring a lot of things together, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. Not
Yeah.
a question, but
No worries. Yeah, I always get frustrated when people are like, oh, humans are like the really only social creatures. And it's like, no, like plants are socializing under the ground and like sharing resources. So I think it's like really important to like make sure that we like don't take this almost ivory tower approach to our humanity. I think that's why we're in the systems that we're in right now, is like we think that we're better animals than everyone else. And so we've taken this prescriptive approach to how we're managing this system. But, beavers tend to manage water systems better than we do. So maybe we should leave that up to the beavers. And like having that kind of more holistic approach to, globalization is kind of what I'm hoping that we can get to in this kind of generation, is, realizing that trees and animals provide such an important aspect to the world, and like they actually might have a lot more wisdom about how to like exist here than we do. And often we don't really think about that and the social energy that they also provide to the world. So
and I think about how like there like every human on earth has social energy to offer, but sometimes their social energy is taken up by other priorities. And so who is afforded resources so that they have enough more social energy to offer for changing structures versus other people. So that I don't know, that word just like helped me really like materialize some things that I think I already knew. But yeah, I agree.
that's such a good point. Like I was just talking about this with my intern team, like the ability to uplift structures of oppression takes a lot of emotional or social energy. And it's like, if you're in a poor environmental space, it's going to be pretty impossible to go through that emotional or social energy if you're not getting clean water or clean air, clean or good food every day. So.
And I feel like that's why it's so important to field people who and center people who have been oppressed by these systems in this kind of work that we're doing, where we're trying to bring people together who are doing work that interconnects in really important ways, and to build better systems for those people. And for, I mean, in a lot of ways, as you were talking about, we oppress nature and it goes hand in hand. Does anyone else have any more questions before we move into our closing?
I do. Are there any systems out there that rate or basically audit businesses that want to do any kind of donut economics or social good economics in that sense, that businesses, similar to B Corp, can get that certification and then be of more interest to entities like Portland government funded entities or other spaces that's like, we would prefer working with entities that have this accreditation or anything like that, or rating?
There isn't necessarily, but what there does exist there's the Diversity Business Enterprise Program and the Women Small and Emerging Business Programs, which are, I'd say, pretty similar to a donut economic model, where they realize that women and people of color and low income folks have a lot less likelihood of being able to get to building their own business. And it's a state-run program that gives you a lot of resources and helps you set up your business to function sustainably. And it's a program through the city. Cities have this program, so the city of Corvallis would have this program as well. Counties have it, and then states have it. And I will put the link into the chat for the Oregon version of that.
Awesome, thank you.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for being here. We will be sure to send you all of the resources discussed and link to all of Quincy's work in a follow-up email, as well as this recording. And we'll have information about our next featured speaker. These shape shops are going to be bi-monthly, and we really encourage you to come to them because they'll build on each other, and you'll just get a way clearer picture of the landscape of donut economics in Portland. And there will be so many opportunities to get involved. So thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at the next one, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Quincy.
And thank you, Quincy.
Quincy.
Also, shout out to Max. Went to high school with him. I don't know. I think he left, but see you later, dude.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Quincy.
Yeah.
Bye.